I always like to start a tour here at this marker plate, which really dedicates the concept of the Anzac Memorial and the kind of values that we're really driving at here. Because this memorial, we often get people who come here and ask, is this a monument to victory? Is it a monument to success? Is it a glorification of the military? And we say no to all those. Ultimately, what this place is one of grieving. It's a space where people can come to remember, and a place where we're recognising the attributes of our Australian service people. Those being courage, endurance and sacrifice, which was simply brought forth by the War of 1914 to 18, and one would also argue all the other conflicts that Australia's fought in. We're not here to suggest that war is necessarily the focus. It's about humanity, human nature. Now, the other thing to remember is the War of 1914 to 1918. 370,000 Australians fought overseas. 62,000 of them were killed. One body was brought back here to Australia to be buried. Now, in the 1990s, we got our second body back, the unknown soldier. But as of right now, December of 2023, we do only have those two sets of human remains of Australians who fought during the Great War. And so what that meant was 62,000 families back here in Australia who had no grave that they could visit to lay flowers and reflect and remember and do the sorts of things that are appropriate to do in a cemetery. And as such, communities got together and started building memorials. Little memorials, the ones in the park, maybe a roll of honour at the school or the church, just something to say that people from this community went before. The political momentum that generated then allowed us to get to the big memorials like this one. And the concept was that each capital city in Australia should have a memorial which would service the people of that capital. So this is the principal military memorial for the state of New South Wales. Each other state capital has a principal one for that state, and then of course the Australian War Memorial in Canberra is the federal one with the purview of the entire nation. Now we'll head out into the park. Now, the artistry and the design of this memorial is rather complex. However, I think we can reasonably distill its messages into three general categories. And those are the idea of equal service, and it doesn't matter what role you fulfill within the Australian military in the defence of Australia, that you are recognised as being equal for this place. The second is the idea of eternal memory. People are gone, never, life is temporary, never more so than during times of war, but we're here to remember eternally and to continue to pass that memory down the generations. And also the idea of the dawning of a new day, that despite the horrors of war, that we're here in Australia, we're pretty lucky in that respect, and that it's worth living for the rest of us, for those who could. So what we're seeing here on the side of the building just directly above us is a bas relief. One of two reliefs in bronze by George Rayner Hoff, who did all the sculpture for this building, and the purpose of these bas reliefs was to represent all the different corps and trades within the Australian military during the First World War. So we have our combat scenes going on over to my right hand side here with our tanks, machine gunners, riflemen, grenadiers, artillery, all the guys that are getting stuck in. However, further over this side we have men laying a telephone cable, we have a bicycle messenger with his basket full of pigeons, we have mechanics working on a plane, there's some navigators, plotting a course on a map. So the idea of this is we're not just here for those people who are at the sharp end, we're there for those working behind the lines as well, those who are taking the risk. And the reason that they were so keen to represent all the different roles during the First World War is that if you're one of those family members whose loved one is buried on the far side of the world and you maybe can't visit their grave because that's a long, expensive journey to Turkey or France or Belgium, it doesn't matter for you what job they did in the military. It doesn't matter if they were laying a telephone signal or if they won the Victoria Cross storming a machine gun post. For you, that loss is the same. You've still lost someone that's important to you. And as such, because our primary function here is as a memorial, everybody is being represented. Now, similar to the bas relief, these represent the 20 key fields during the First World War, which people could fulfill within the military. And again, we have a good mix of combat roles and service roles. So we have our matron on the corner here, a fighter pilot. Over to the other corner, we have a rifleman, we have our telephonist, we have a gas miner, we have an artilleryman. So a good mix of combat and supporting roles again, so that everybody is represented. Now, it's almost a cliche at this point to say that common refrain of people that went to war is that they went and fought, they came home, they got on with their life and they never spoke about it. The idea here is that you don't have to speak about it. If you were a rifleman during the First World War, all you have to do is come to the Anzac Memorial and point. There's no speech required. You non-verbally indicate your experience, and it's there for your family, friends, loved ones, anybody that you want to share your experience with without you having to go into it. Now, our matron's also significant for this being the first military memorial in the Anglosphere and possibly the world, we're not quite sure about that, to represent the role of women in war as equal to that of men. Our matron here is exactly the same height as our fighter pilot, and on the other corners we have a naval captain and an infantryman representing the Navy and the Army, and all the 4 statues are exactly the same height. Again, not one is suggested as being more or less important than the other. They are all being represented equally because they've all taken an equal risk. They've all put the uniform on, and once I was giving a tour here to a Vietnam vet from up in Warhope, and he said something that really stuck with me, that when you join the military, what you've essentially done is sign a blank check to the government. The government can cash your life, your health, your mind, body, but everybody who's put the uniform on, irregardless of which area of service they've ended up in, has signed that blank check and has been willing to make that sacrifice, and as such, that's why they're all equally being represented here. So with that, we'll head back on inside.
It's pretty forward thinking for whatever we've been built.
So we'll be heading upstairs for the next bit. So from the very beginning here in Hyde Park, we've had that dual military and civilian function. It was a place where people would come to relax, as well as a place where the military would come and do their business. Now, this area has been used for everything from horse races to cricket matches. Before white settlement, it was a meeting place where different Indigenous clans could come together and settle disputes and dialogue with one another. And, you know, the Anzac Memorial remains another part of that long tradition. Now, we won't have time to visit this today, but off to my left here you can see the sculpture of the bullets. Now, though, that is the Indigenous Services Memorial of New South Wales. And in this area here, if you look to the north, we have our reflecting pool. This has been here since 1934, however, it's been retouched up a few times. Right, so round 1 of British Royal Family Trivia. Who was the king, 24th of November 1934, and which son of his do we reckon was the one that came and opened the Anzac Memorial? Any guesses? So George V was the king, and Prince Henry was his son that opened this place up. So George IV had 3 sons. Edward VIII, who famously abdicated, Albert, who became George VI, and then was the father of Queen Elizabeth, and then Prince Henry III, the youngest of the children, who was the uncle to Queen Elizabeth, came here to open the Anzac Memorial. Now, the reason that he was sent out here is he got himself into a little bit of trouble back in the United Kingdom. And he had gone on a safari with a nobleman and the nobleman's wife. They'd gotten a little bit too close for comfort, the scandal was all going, and then his punishment was to come out to the colonies and open some buildings. However, for our purpose, Prince Henry was also a member of the British Army. He eschewed the British familial tradition of going into the Navy and instead joined the Army, and this was really the start of quite a long association he had with the state of New South Wales. He was too young to fight in World War I, but he fought with distinction in the Second World War, and then afterwards he came to be the Governor of New South Wales and eventually the Governor-General of Australia. So, rather an ignominious start to quite a nice relationship. However, for us, he's not Prince Henry, the Duke of Gloucester, KCB and all of his other titles. He's just son of the King.
So why don't they put his proper, like his full name?
So we have a policy here of no names, not of anyone.
Okay.
So there's one very annoying exception to this in the building, which I'll point out to you in a minute. But generally speaking, we have a goal of not naming any individuals here. There's a very specific reason for that. And that's that when you start naming people, they become a pilgrimage. And famous people, people who are royal, people who've done greatly heroic deeds or whatever, become the focus. And then it tends to drown out everybody else. This way, we've represented everybody ubiquitously. Once again, it doesn't matter which corps you were in, male or female, Army, Navy, Air Force or medical. It doesn't matter if you were literally royalty. As far as this building is concerned, the sole qualifier that you need in order to be recognised by this place is to put the uniform on. Prince Henry put the uniform on. All those Anzacs who put the uniform on, again, we're representing them. They're all equal here. Now, this was where Prince Henry was standing, the 24th of November. However, out in the park is the area that I really like to talk about because just imagine there were 100,000 Sydney-siders out here.
Wow.
10% of the state's population came to the opening of this building. And I think that really underscores how important it was to the people. Now, bear in mind, this was the middle of the Great Depression. People were struggling and scrimping and saving to survive. And yet, you have a building like this, perhaps a bit of a white elephant, but nonetheless something that everybody was very, very passionate and felt important about. Now, during the First World War, New South Wales had a population of 900,000. 120,000 of them saw service in uniform. Think about those kind of numbers, you're looking at well over 10%. You can imagine why so many of the people of the state came to the opening. Now, we'll see photographs of that later, but it is one of those things. You had people spilling out to the northern end of the park, all the way down here, all the way along to the south, along Liverpool Street. The whole area was just cram-packed full of people out here to see the opening. Now, the original plan for the Anzac Memorial dates to 1928. It was submitted as part of a competition, and there were all the different architectural firms around Sydney submitting their idea of what the ideal memorial would look like. Now, this is the winner, and if you look at the artistic style, what we're seeing is Art Deco. Now, Art Deco grew out of the French style of Art Nouveau, and it was first formalised at the 1925 Paris World Fair. So you think about that, 3 years after the style was first recognised, here we have a major military monument being built in that style, and the reason was because it was modern. It was the most radical, the most cutting edge and forward thinking way of construction at that particular time. Now, to the south here we have the Cascade. Now, this water feature does date to the original plan from 1928, however it was not built until 2018, and the reason is because of the Great Depression. In order to get this place off the ground, they said, okay, we have to cut something from the plan in order to get it going, and the Cascade unfortunately got the trouble. So 2014, when we were given a large funding grant by the government as part of the 100th anniversary commemorations of the First World War, they said, what do you want to do to the memorial in order to have it better reflect the messages going into the 21st century? And we said, okay, job number one, realise the original vision and get that cascade built. And there's a very specific reason for that. And to the north we have the reflecting pool, which is still. The water's on one level, it's flat, and unless somebody's walking in it, it is still and calm and peaceful and tranquil, suggesting the idea of taking a moment of just quietness, peace, to contemplate and think about those Australians who didn't make it back from times of conflict. To the south here, we have the Cascade, where the water is opposite to that. It's moving, it's falling down multiple levels, it's progressing, it's in motion, and that's symbolising the idea of getting moving again. The idea that we're not here to suggest that people should be consumed by grief and that they should be bogged down by it for the rest of their lives, but instead that a hell of a lot of people didn't get the opportunity to go on living. It's up to the rest of us to live in their place. That's what we're seeing suggested for down here. So with that, now we'll head on inside. This area artistically is communicating the messages of Australia's experience during the First World War. Now, starting from the ceiling, we have a number of gold stars in a constellation. Now, it's a figure that I've already said. Does anybody want to guess how many stars there are?
2,000.
The number of service members.
Not 62,000? No. 120,000, that's it. Yep, so the idea is every service person from the state of New South Wales got a star on the ceiling. Doesn't matter whether they were killed, wounded, survived unscathed, whatever that means within the context of the First World War, every single one of them once again equally represented. Now, we're not the Australian War Memorial in Canberra where they have a list of names. Here, once again, equally, everybody is represented by a star. The thing we love about the stars, though, is that was actually the fundraiser for how this place was built. They weren't on the original plan, this is just an afterthought. Now, the planning permission for this building was given. This design won the competition in early 1929, and a few months later the Wall Street crash occurs in October. The state government runs right out of money, and their initial promise to totally fund the construction of this place is walked right back. And so the trustees of the building get together and decide, all right, we're going to do a fundraiser. We'll divide the cost of construction by 120,000, and it worked out to about 2 shillings per star. Now, bear in mind, this is a time when people were earning about 4 or 5 shillings a week, so that'd be probably the equivalent of about $200 or $300 in modern currency. Now, the idea was every time somebody gave one of those 2 shilling donations, that was one entire person's service that was being covered by that donation. So obviously the emphasis was very much on families and friends and survivors and people who'd lost somebody to make that donation in the name of someone in particular. Now, by the time 120,000 donations had been collected and a star had been made for each donation, we now have this testament not only to all the individuals of the state who went to fight, but also to the people who, even during the Great Depression, a third of the state out of work, were willing to sacrifice some of their money in order to get this place off the ground. And that really is, better than anything else, a nod to the idea that this is a people's memorial as well. Now, beneath the stars, we can see the 4 bas-reliefs corresponding to the 4 service areas. So we have Army, Navy, Air Force and Medical, and once again, our matron is scaled to our personnel from all the other services. Now, people wearing the uniforms in front are exhausted, they're tired, they're hunched over, they've been fighting the war for 4 long years, but against the odds they've managed to survive. Behind them, we have these other strong, shadowy figures marching in an endless counterclockwise circuit around the room. There's no start point, nor is there an end point to their march, they're all circulating in the same direction. Now that's symbolic of the ghosts, the soldiers of those who didn't make it home. Now the reason that they're depicted as being strong and tall and muscular, fit, is because this is Hoff's way of suggesting that that's how we should remember them. Not in pain and suffering and struggling on the front lines, but instead it's the best that we have to send as young men who are capable, and women as well, who unfortunately didn't make it back. Now as we go further down, we see the 4 niches here, which has a region of the world and a number of the battles fought by Australians underneath it. For the army, they started with Gallipoli, then they split with the light horse going over to infantry Palestine, and then the infantry and the other heavy units going down to France and Belgium. The 4th niche over here is for the Navy, and as you'll see at the base of each niche we have a rising sun symbol. Now the capstones, which represent the sun, were all taken from one of the battlefields on the walls here. This one comes from Amiens, the one over there from Cavacool, the one here from Romani, and the one there from the beach of Gallipoli. This idea of bringing a part of the battlefield home here to symbolise the land that was being fought over. Now if you look at the others, you'll notice that they're lacquered black. This one's been left white. Now the simple answer as to why that is that we don't know. It could be something as benign as that they ran out of black lacquer when it came to doing this one, and as such, it remains here just as a bit of an oddity. However, our curators come up with a theory that goes beyond that, and this is a reference to a German strategy from the First World War. Now, at the beginning of the war, in the first couple of weeks, the Germans had successfully invaded most of Belgium and large tracts of northern France. They got bogged down fighting in the trenches, and they realised that, you know what, when you're sitting down in this trench and the enemy's coming at you, things are pretty good. When you have to get out of the trench and go towards them, things are pretty bad. So because we're occupying enemy territory, we're just going to stay there, sit in our trenches and fight a defensive war because we know they have to come at us. And the idea is we're going to kill 6 of them for every one of us that gets killed. And the metaphor that the German general who came up with this thinking used to sell that plan to the Kaiser was we're going to bleed them white. We're going to kill so many of them that the rest of them become weakened and anemic and unable to continue fighting. 9,500 casualties, fatalities I should say, sustained on Gallipoli, about 1,500 over in Egypt and Palestine, fewer than 1,000 on the high seas, 50,000 in France and Belgium. By an enormous margin, this is the deadliest area of Australian military conflict, to the extent that of all the Australians killed in war, about 1 in every 2 was killed on the lines of France and Belgium. This is where Australia, more than anywhere else, has come the closest to being bled white, and we believe, interpretively, that this is what's being suggested here by the Sunstone. Now, if we turn our attention here to the centre, everybody gets space here on the balustrade.
Visitors are invited to participate in this short service located on the upper floor in the Hall of Memory.
So at 11 a.m. we'll have our moments of silence. The routes will be played.
Followed by 1 minute silence and the raps. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old, and it shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them, lest we forget. This concludes the Service of Remembrance. Thank you for your participation.
Every piece interlocks. Once again, there is no start point, there is no end point. It's just an eternal circle suggesting eternal memory. Now, over here in this room where we have the flame, originally there was supposed to be a library. The idea was that a volume which went into the detailed history of every Australian unit that fought during the First World War would be stored in there, and then, similar to the Buckley's figures, if you were coming here to learn more about the experience of a family member or a friend, they didn't have to do that. You could just go in here to the library, you could look it up, and you would be able to see what they'd done and where they were. Beautiful concept. The only slight problem was that none of those books were ever published. So this remained a storage room for many years until AGL donated us the gas burner in 1985. Now, shrewd piece of businessmanship because they donated us the gas burner and they charged us for the gas. So, yeah, very tricky on their part. The other thing as well, of course, is that being a library, it's not particularly well ventilated in terms of having a naked flame going in there. So, unlike a true eternal flame, you turn this one down to a private light at night. So you have a little blue flame like you might have on a barbecue or a Bunsen burner, and that's what burns for us overnight in order to keep it safe and also hopefully not run over too much. So, same concept as an eternal flame, just done slightly differently for our circumstances here. So we'll be heading on downstairs now. Now, one of the inspirations for this building was the Tomb of Napoleon, the infamous Paris, the idea where you can go up to the top and view the Emperor's tomb down from above. This is the same concept. And in a way, it's really quite special that nobody does go in here nowadays because it keeps it undisturbed in the same way that a grave is undisturbed. Again, the memorial being a surrogate for a grave or a final resting place, that's part of the ceremony and the simplicity that's going on here. Now, the one thing that I always really love to point out about sacrifice at this particular level is that here the wife has one arm around the child and another arm supporting the head of our fallen warrior. Over the back we can't see it, but the sister has one arm supporting the weight of our warrior and the other arm draped around her chest. The mother over here has both of her arms very firmly planted, supporting the weight of our warrior. She is the only of the three figures who is supporting the warrior with both hands. We believe that this is Pop's own personal way of showing that losing your husband or your father or your brother in a time of war is really, really horrible. But to lose your child in war is unthinkable. And it's their own quite unique, special, quiet way of suggesting that unique suffering and pain and loss associated with that generation of parents who had their children and then had them taken away. Everything that we've seen so far, all the design, everything, is about the First World War. And when they built this place, they thought surely no one is going to be bloody stupid enough to have another global conflict. We've done industrial scale warfare once, we've learned better, now hopefully we can live in peace for all time. And then of course, less than 5 years later, the angry moustache model from Germany proved us all wrong, and Australia was at war once again. Australia then went to Korea, Malaya, Borneo, Vietnam, a number of other conflicts, and so the question was then becoming, okay, what about all these other veterans? So 50 years later, in 1984, they finally got around to formally rededicating the memorial as being a memorial to all Australians who've served their country in times of war. It was no longer just for those men and women who fought in the First World War and sacrificed them. It's now officially, formally recognised as a place where all of those can come, grieve and be remembered, and now using that ceremonial space properly to commemorate all of our different periods of conflict. So we'll move in through here now, through a public donations drive by the custodians of this memorial. And those custodians were basically operating charities for people who'd lost as a result of the First World War, and those charities could be divided into two fairly distinct camps. The first were the widows' charities, which also included the mothers, the sisters, the family members, those who'd lost people and wanted a space for grieving, as we've been seeing. And the second faction, I guess you could say, of the custodians were the veterans groups themselves. Groups like the RSL, the Limbless Soldiers Association, the United Services, all these groups which, instead of wanting something that was very beautiful and very symbolic and representative, they wanted a practical space. They wanted somewhere that they could come to socialise, they wanted somewhere they could come to get help finding employment and support, and somewhere they could come to get medical care. So the compromise that we came up with is what we refer to as the working memorial concept, and we also hold that as one of our proud traditions, that we are the only working memorial in Australia, and that is an unbroken tradition that here, 89 years later, we still have veterans coming to us to get the sort of basic help that they need to get back on their feet and to get going if they need it. Now this space here was the offices of the RSL of New South Wales, and the area over here, which is now our retail space, was a workshop. Now what they would make in that workshop were prosthetic limbs, so that if an individual had gone to war, they'd lost an arm or a leg, that would be made here. Behind this door on the other side, there was an area which was a doctor's office, and an individual would come, they'd get their prescription for the limb, it'd be made here, fitted out the back, and then they'd be able to go on their merry way. So this did remain an area that was sought out by veterans and a place where they were physically getting assistance and getting help. Alright, so we had the Hall of Memory upstairs, and this area down here is the Hall of Service. The two areas designed to mirror one another and to have the original commemoration of Australia during the Great War, to continue the commemoration of the Great War down here, and then also to bring in all the other conflicts that Australia has been involved in. Now on these plates that are made of magnesium, we have names. 1,701 of them in total. And they range from big cities like Sydney to towns, villages, suburbs, farms, sheep stations in some cases. They're all locations in New South Wales. Now when men joined the military for the First World War, they filled out their paperwork and they'd record their name and their date of birth, their occupation. Hometown was a box that they had to fill. And what we're having here is every response that was put into that box of hometown. This is in the servicemen's own words, where they came from and the land that they were fighting for. Now in the glass jars next to each location we have a soil sample. Now where possible, those soil samples were taken from the local war memorial in that area. So this one comes from the garden just outside, this being the War Memorial for Sydney. And these represent the homelands of all those individuals who fought during the First World War. Now, as I said, where possible, taken from the local war memorials, because this is a symbol not only of all the homelands and the communities that sent men to go and fight, but also of the momentum, those early memorials that were built in order to get this trend going of having places where people can come to grieve if perhaps they were unable to visit the final resting place of a loved one. Now we contrast those soil samples on the wall with the ones here in the centre. 1,701 of the walls, 100 here in the centre. These are battlefields. Now it's certainly not every battle that Australia's ever participated in. They started with a list of about 450 and moved it down to 100. Now what these are significant for is that all of them had some degree of participation from personnel from New South Wales. Harking back to the very beginning of the tour, we have this bas relief. Now this is a 2/3 scale copy of the one on the exterior of the building, and everybody come through. The good thing about these is that they can be touched. So if that's your sort of thing, definitely get up close and personal with them, because once again, it is a way of representing all the different trade fields within the Australian military during the First World War, and then representing that into the present day. Now, it's injection molded crushed marble that was put in with a resin in order to stabilise the shape. We'll also just continue moving it this way. Quite an unusual sort of feeling to it. Yeah, all Australian Jarrah. Emphasis as much as possible, all the material should have come from Australia. So all the marble upstairs was quarried in New South Wales. All the wood, again, this one's from Western Australia, so as close as we could get today. Now, as I was saying earlier, one of our chief points of pride is the ability to provide a space for veterans and the opportunities for them to get going, especially in civilian life. Now, one of those programs is our Veteran Artist in Residency, and the idea is that every year we select one individual who's seen service who is now working as an artist, and we give them a 12-month grant in order to work alongside us and to produce a battery of work which is reflective of their message and what they're into. Now, photography is the medium of Jack McLean, our artist for this previous year, and if you look on the walls on either side, you'll see a number of portraits. Now, each of the individuals in the portraits are Australians from the state of New South Wales who served in Vietnam. And if you see the photo of Jack over on the information plate, you'll see that his camera is rather old. In fact, it was made in the year 1909. So rather than recording images onto film or a digital image, instead they record them onto a glass plate, which the image is then burned onto these silver nitrate, what's the term called, printings here. Now, glass plate photography is very, very finicky. However, it does have one very distinct advantage over other forms of photography, and that is that the burning of the light onto the negative is occurring at the molecular level. You're getting a resolution in the ballpark of about 3 million megapixels, and as such, we have these extraordinarily detailed portraits here. And because they're printed onto silver, they're going to last between 3,000 and 5,000 years. Again, our last veterans from the First World War died in 2009. Now they're all gone, just committed to our memory. And it's only by talking about them here and remembering them that we're able to keep that memory alive. When we're all dead and buried, these photos are still going to remain. It's a testament to what these individuals did in Vietnam and what they did for our country. Now, still got a little bit of time, so we'll head out this way. Who just keeps cropping up. Grandson of the Queen. Alright, who's the guest?
Harry.
Prince Harry, yeah. So it's quite nice that we had Henry the Duke of Gloucester who opened the area upstairs, and Henry the Duke of Sussex who opened this area down here, and both of them being members of the British Army, both of them having eschewed that British royal family tradition of going into the Navy, and both of them who've seen active service. Prince Henry during the Second World War, Prince Henry during Iraq and Afghanistan. Once again, here, 80 or so years later, we haven't changed, except for James Rowland, who, we've spoken about. For our purposes, Prince Harry was just another one of those individuals who put the uniform on, who signed the blank cheque and was willing to go over and give everything up to and including his life. Now, we still have gotten a couple of angry letters from people who are saying this is not the proper way to say it, you're supposed to say Prince Henry and all of his titles and everything else. We have a letter in our archive from him personally, signed by him, saying that this is how he wants it to be. Our curatorial team and our historians were able to explain to him the meaning behind our no-names policy here at the memorial, and he said, you know what, I put the uniform on, I went and did what was expected, so as far as I'm concerned, I'm very happy to be just one of the boys, one of the people who went in and did what was necessary, nothing more and nothing less. So we'll head over this way. This whole area down here, went at each one of them with a fine file and then scratched this shape into them. Now, each one of them is representing a floral emblem, which has significance for Australia's military history, and this is a tradition that evokes back to the First World War. Now, many of the Australian servicemen who went to the First World War were underage, and the vast majority of them, of course, were very, very young. They were fit and capable, but hadn't lived, weren't particularly worldly, and so for most of them it was their first time outside of the country, in places with strange sights and sounds, and particularly smells. And of course, when you're back in the Australian bush, smelling a blue gum, there's something pretty unmistakable about that unique Australian plant life. The tradition that the family members, the wives and the mothers, children, the sisters back at home would do was when writing a letter to their loved ones serving overseas, they'd take a sprig of gum leaf or some wattle or some waratah, anything native, they'd stick it in the envelope to send it over. Now the men participated in that exchange, and you'll see other ones like rosemary from Gallipoli, you'll see the Aleppo pine from Palestine, you'll see the Flanders poppy on one of the glass vases, again symbolising that exchange of the familiar with the unfamiliar, so that for that moment that those individuals open that letter, They were just a little bit more closely connected to those people on the far side of the world. So we'll continue on through this way. We have our library over this side as well, closed for the holidays, but their collection is exhaustive. There's very few books. So this historical museum gallery display in here is where I usually like to finish up. I think it's a great point to sort of jump off, finish. We're continuing the tradition of representing the stories based upon the buttress figures around the exterior. The idea that even now, 89 years later, this is still a place where people can come as veterans and they don't have to talk about their experiences. You have the sculptures here, original to the buttresses around the exterior, and then building upon those stories, there are associated objects. So we have the uniforms, the weapons, the equipment of platoon commanders, of fighter pilots, of nurses, naval watch captains, of all the different professions within the Australian military during all those periods. We have them represented during the First World War, we have them represented into the present day. Once again, nothing's changed, we're just updating our memorial and continuing with those original messages. So with that, I'll be wandering around here until 12 o'clock if anybody has any questions, anything that wasn't clear that you'd like me to go over. It's been a busy day for sure, so certainly a little bit chaotic, but again, thank you everybody so much for coming. It's been my absolute pleasure talking to you all.
Thank you.